Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Chemicals Quarterly Q2 2025 Regulatory Update. So just a little bit of orientation about the webinar platform before I introduce our speakers for today. The webinar slides are available to the left side of your screen, along with a few helpful links if you would like to explore and learn more about compliance and risks and how we can simplify and accelerate your compliance processes. We want this webinar to be as engaging as possible, so please do send us any questions you may have, and we'll aim to address them with you directly. If you would like to submit a question for this Q&A session, just use the Ask a Question widget on the left side of your screen. And as always, we'll follow up with you all directly for any questions that you submit. And at any time, if you'd like a member of our team to reach out with you outside of the Ask a Question feature, please don't hesitate to use the Start a Conversation button at the bottom of your screen. And last but not least, the webinar recording will be sent to you within 24 hours. My name is Orla Morris, and I'm Content Marketing Manager here at Compliance and Risks, and I'm delighted to be joined by the wonderful Kim Plashy, Senior Regulatory Content Specialist on the Content Research and Development team. Kim specialises in international product safety legislation with a strong focus on chemicals and products and environmental regulations. She stays at the forefront of the evolving regulatory landscape. Kim holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies and a Master of Library Science, both from the University of Buffalo. Before joining CNR, Kim gained extensive experience in university, public and private libraries. She's also a published author with articles and research contributions featured in peer-reviewed journals and academic texts. Additionally, Kim has significant experience in the consumer products testing industry and has provided research and technical support for both internal testing teams and external clients. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kim.
Thank you, Orla.
We're also joined by Cassie Persian, who's a Senior Regulatory Content Specialist on the Content Research and Development team, responsible for the creation and management of essential regulatory information. A librarian by training with 16 years experience in the consumer products industry, she specializes in global research for clients across the supply chain. Cassie is based in the Buffalo, New York area and currently enjoys a focus on product labeling and chemical restrictions, as well as her participation in ASTM standards development. Thank you for joining us today, Cassie.
Hi, guys. Thank you.
So before we kick off the webinar, I would like to provide a background about compliance and risks for those who are joining us for the first time. At Compliance and Risks, our mission is to help ensure global companies have the tools and information to build a safe, sustainable products in a world full of change. We are the trusted product compliance technology provider for the world's leading brands and have spent 2 decades honing the digital tools, expertise, and content you need to stay ahead of the dynamic regulatory landscape, proving your product's compliance, protecting your brands, and helping to drive your growth. At Compliance and Risks, we have the world's most comprehensive regulatory database with over 100,000 regulations historically available in C2P. With a global regulatory coverage and expertise across over 10 industries, we understand that regulatory compliance definitely doesn't sleep. And our regulatory experts team is truly global, with 28 languages collectively spoken across the team, all fortified by our 30 knowledge partners. And as mentioned, C2P is our enterprise SME-led software, the key to unlocking market access with new products designed and built with full confidence that you've met all compliance obligations. And this includes keeping on top of regulatory changes and their impact worldwide, using early warning alerts, impact probability, productivity workflow tools, and so much more. And with that, I'm delighted to hand it over to you, Kim.
Great. Thank you so much, Orla. So today, just a little bit of orientation for where we're going with our webinar. We're starting globally with me covering just one update there, headed through the Americas before I pass it off to Cassie to finish us up on the eastern side of the globe. So starting off at the global level, we have some updates with the Stockholm Convention. 3 decisions were issued this quarter adding new chemicals as persistent organic pollutants. The first is chlorpyrifos. Then we also have medium chain chlorinated paraffins and long chain perfluorocarboxylic acids. Production and use of each of the 3 are banned, with exemptions laid out in the decisions and highlighted on our slide here. Going to move swiftly through to South America. I'm sorry, we do have a lot to cover, so please be sure to check the slides for anything that I may have gone through too quickly. So starting off in South America, some news from Brazil regarding their REACH proposal. They temporarily suspended the public consultation on the draft implementing regulation to law number 15.022, which is their REACH. This opened on May 13th and it was closed shortly after. The consultation was originally scheduled to run for 30 days, ending on June 13th, but the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change paused it to make what they are calling necessary adjustments. No official date has yet been announced for when the consultation will reopen. However, when it does, the ministry has said it will be set for 60 days instead of that original 30. The draft regulation sets out requirements for registering chemical substances produced or imported into Brazil, prioritizing risk assessments, and establishing risk management measures. Stakeholders are encouraged to monitor official channels for updates and prepare to participate when that consultation resumes. And of course, we will provide any updates as they come along as well. Some news from the Dominican Republic, which we don't have an opportunity to report on too often. In May, their Senate proposed a law to progressively eliminate expanded polystyrene in single-use products while promoting sustainable alternatives. If this is enacted, the law will prohibit the use of the foam in manufactured, imported, and distributed products within the country 5 years after its entry into force. On April 24th, Mercosur approved Resolution 2 of 2025, which amends Resolution 40 of 2015. That is a technical regulation on cellulose materials, packaging, and equipment in contact with food. This resolution amends Part 2 of the Annex and establishes that the amount of disopropyl naphthalene in finished products containing recycled fibers must be kept as low as technically feasible. The resolution now must be incorporated into national legislation of the member states by October 21st of this year. Just a reminder, that does include Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Moving up to North America with some federal news from the United States to begin. The TCE rules from EPA, there have been some changes with the exemptions for this. So initially, the EPA delayed the start date of some of the rules for TCE for 90 days until June 20th. On June 23rd, it was officially published in the Federal Register that an additional extension of that postponement was now in place until August 19th. Previously, the EPA issued a final rule on December 17, 2024 to ban most uses of TCE due to its toxicity, with the original full rule effective start date for January 16, 2025. We've covered that quite a bit in previous webinars. Under TSCA Section 6G, some critical uses, notably in battery manufacturing, received exemptions. However, companies and the Alliance for a Strong U.S. Battery Sector challenged these new rules in court, arguing that the stringent workplace conditions for those exempted uses were too difficult for them to implement, effectively nullifying those exemptions by making their operations impossible. To allow judicial review of those objections and prevent immediate disruption to those critical industries, the EPA has postponed the effectiveness of those specific challenge conditions. So this only applies to those conditions on the TSCA exemptions, not to the broader prohibitions on other TCE uses. Also from the EPA, we have another delay to the PFAS reporting obligations under TSCA. Recall back in 2023, the EPA issued that final rule mandating a one-time electronic reporting of information on PFAS and PFAS-containing articles manufactured and imported since January 1st, 2011. That was initially set to begin in November of last year, and the reporting period was first delayed to July 2025. This quarter, we saw another delay on May 13th. The EPA further postponed that data submission period. It will now begin on April 13th, 2026, and conclude October 13th of that year. Small manufacturers who exclusively import articles have an alternate submission deadline of April 13th, 2027. A few final significant new use rules were published this quarter. Just a reminder that when one of these is made, it amends 40 CFR 721 to add the named substances to the list. Manufacturers and importers must notify the agency at least 90 days before commencing any activity that is designated as a significant new use. That notification then prompts EPA to review and evaluate the conditions of the proposed use. Importantly, production may not begin until any steps are taken at the conclusion of EPA's review. The first one on June 16th only included these 4 substances I've listed on the slide here. The June 23rd significant new use rule that was issued actually has quite a few substances. I've just listed some of the key ones on the slide here, but please be sure to check that citation if you think this may apply to you. On June 5th, EPA announced the availability of draft risk evaluations for 2 significant chemical substances, dibutylphthalate and diethylhexylphthalate. DBP and DEHP's primary applications are as plasticizers in PVC products, but they are also used in various other materials, including adhesives, sealants, paints, coatings, and rubbers. EPA designated both the substances as high priority for risk evaluation back in December 2019. Now the agency is actively seeking input on numerous facets of that evaluation, including the effectiveness and use of PPE, the methodology and application of cumulative risk analysis, and any detailed information concerning human health and environmental hazard endpoints. The FDA issued a significant warning regarding dinnerware products crafted from the sheaths of A. catechu palm leaves on May 8th. The letter to retailers, distributors, and importers alert that these products have the potential to leach toxic alkaloid chemicals into food. The specific alkaloids are listed on the slide here. The evaluation report revealed that these naturally occurring chemicals are found in various parts of the plant. Ingesting these has been linked to negative health effects, notably cancer. The agency has determined that such dinnerware should not be sold on the U.S. market, despite them having some labeling suggesting reusability, microwaving, or washing. The FDA's findings highlight the inherent health risks due to that chemical leaching. As I begin covering the states here, I do want to remind you we have a limited time for the webinar, and this quarter was surprisingly busy in the US states. I tried to pick out the big stories with the maximum impact for our attendees. We can't include everything though, so please be sure to put all of your questions in the Q&A for us to address as we go through. Starting off with California, their Department of Toxic Substances Control has proposed adding microplastics to the candidate chemicals list due to their environmental persistence, widespread mobility, and the potential to harm human health and ecosystems. This rulemaking would enable DTSE to evaluate and potentially regulate consumer products that contain or generate microplastics. Public comment on this is open until August 4th. Over to Illinois, HB 2516 amends the PFAS Reduction Act, introducing significant new restrictions on products containing intentionally added PFAS. After passing both legislative chambers on May 31st, which was the final day of their session, the bill was sent to the governor on June 24th. The act bans the sale or distribution of cosmetics, dental floss, juvenile products, menstrual products, and intimate apparel with intentionally added PFAS and would be effective January 1st, 2032. HB 1295, another PFAS bill in the state that we were tracking, was introduced in January and proposed to expand the act by adding new reporting, testing, and sales restrictions for products with intentionally added PFAS. However, the last update on this was March 21st when it was still in committee, so we are assuming that this one has stalled. On May 6th, the Maine Department of Environmental Protection implemented Chapter 90, prohibiting the sale of new and unused products containing intentionally added PFAS. This regulation also outlines notification requirements for products where PFAS use is deemed currently unavoidable. Adding to these developments, on May 20th, the Maine House of Representatives proposed Legislative Document 1982. This proposed legislation aims to amend the definition of PFAS in state law, including the product ban statute. This new definition is intended to align with the EPA standard and would specify PFAS as chemical substances with at least one of three defined substructures, which is a more precise scope than the current broad definition of at least one fully fluorinated carbon atom. I know that there is frequently a big question what substances would apply as a PFAS, and so this is Maine's first step to make that definition a bit more concise. On May 9th, the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection enacted a significant update to its regulations in 310 CMR 78.00, implementing a ban on specific chemical flame retardants. This measure targets bedding, carpeting, and children's products, residential upholstered furniture, and window treatments. The new rule prohibits these products if they contain any listed flame retardant or its chemical analog in a combined concentration exceeding 1,000 parts per million in any component part. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has proposed new rules, Chapter 7026, requiring manufacturers to report products containing intentionally added PFAS and to pay associated fees. These rules implement Minnesota's 2023 PFAS and Products Law and are designed to gather detailed information about PFAS use in the state. Manufacturers must submit these first reports by January 1st, 2026, including product descriptions, PFAS identities and concentrations, and manufacturer contact information. Annual updates or recertifications are required if the product information changes or new products are introduced. These rules are currently in the public comment phase and may be revised before final adoption, so we will keep watching this one. Minnesota's governor signed HF4 into law on June 12th. The new law keeps the same limits for lead and cadmium, but includes new exemptions for certain product categories, such as keys and specific solder uses, under defined conditions. Keys containing lead are allowed until July 1st, 2028, and after that date, only if they contain no more than 1.5% lead by weight. The definition of covered product is broad, encompassing items like toys, jewelry, school supplies, cookware. These amendments are already in effect. Just a quick one from Montana for anybody that was tracking their PFAS bill. HB 290 did die in process in May, so it's no longer moving forward. This one was focused on its product-specific ban beginning in 2028. There was also a PFAS draft 3984 that died in process, and we will keep watching Montana next session to see if anything similar is proposed. On May 21st, the New Hampshire State Senate and House of Representatives amended RSA 149M64, introducing a new ban on certain PFAS-containing sports products, specifically prohibiting the sale of ski wax, boat wax, surfboard wax, and similar items containing intentionally added PFAS. The new amendment builds upon a broader regulation in August 2024, enacted in August 2024, which is set to take effect on January 1st, 2027, and that one includes a wider range of consumer products like carpets, cosmetics, and food packaging. New Jersey Assembly Bill 5600, introduced in May, proposes sweeping restrictions on products that contain intentionally added PFAS. Beginning 3 years after the bill's effective date, the sale and distribution of products including including apparel, carpet, fabric treatments, cosmetics, food packaging, juvenile products, feminine hygiene products, ski wax, and textile articles containing that intentionally added PFAS would be prohibited for residential use. Cookware with intentionally added PFAS and food contact surfaces or handles 1 year after the effective date must be labeled. Outdoor apparel for severe wet conditions faces phased labeling and sales restrictions. We're also seeing A5260 advance in the New Jersey Assembly. This one would prohibit 2 years after the effective date any apparel containing intentionally added PFAS. And apparel is broadly defined here to include most clothing, footwear, outdoor apparel, and significantly items designed for severe wet conditions, which would be a very early implementation for that, as we've seen in other states, as opposed to other states, rather. On April 8th, New Mexico enacted HB 212, adding it to the list of the first states to implement a phased ban on PFAS in consumer products. It prohibits the sale of cookware, food packaging, dental floss, juvenile products, and firefighting foam starting January 1st, 2027. The second phase is effective January 1st, 2028, and expands to carpets, cleaning products, cosmetics, fabric treatments, feminine hygiene products, textiles, ski wax, and upholstered furniture. By January 1st, 2032, a blanket ban would apply to all non-exempt products unless the use is deemed currently unavoidable. The New York State legislative session ended in June, and with that, many bills we were tracking were left in committee. I won't go through these in great detail since we can expect to see similar bills proposed next session. I do want to point out, though, that at the end of June, Senator Rachel May was reported in the media as saying that the legislature is playing a game of what she calls whack-a-mole with these PFAS proposals that are product by product, and they never go through. And she believes that a sweeping, comprehensive PFAS legislation like we've seen in New Mexico and Minnesota and other states would be more efficient, but she notes that implementation would be a slow process. So we'll return in January 2026 and see if what she's been saying publicly about a more comprehensive legislation being proposed is actually what they have in store. Other than those PFAS bills in New York, we were also tracking 8848/8412. This bill unfortunately did not pass, which would have been good news for our mattress manufacturers out there. The bill sought to extend the existing exemption to the flame retardant prohibitions in Section 37 1003 from 2026 to 2027. Now, without the bill's passage, that date remains January 1st, 2026. Finally, A6679 sought to prohibit the sale or distribution of mercury added lamps in the states, and that one has also not passed. The North Carolina session is scheduled to continue through July 31st, so these two bills are still under consideration here. House Bill 881 seeks to ban the manufacture, use, and distribution of PFAS and PFAS-containing products in North Carolina, with exceptions only where federal law regulates their use. And then House Bill 88 or 882 proposes to establish extended producer responsibility, EPR, for packaging products. But significant for us, it includes a ban on specific toxic substances in packaging and prohibits intentionally added PFAS in packaging. This bill does aim to reduce those toxic chemical uses while promoting safer packaging and holding producers accountable for the life cycle impacts of their materials. Ohio introduced HB 272 back in May. This comprehensive bill would phase in bans on intentionally added PFAS in a wide range of consumer products starting January 1st, 2027, with further categories added in 2028 and a near total ban by 2032. Manufacturers under this would also be required to report PFAS content in effective products by January 1st, 2027, and update the information as needed. Their legislative session runs through December 31st, so this bill remains active and will be closely monitored. Oregon enacted SB 1032 on May 28th. So the main purpose is to prohibit the retail sale of aerosol dusters containing DFE to anyone under 18, starting January 1st, 2026. Importantly, all aerosol dusters with that chemical manufactured after that date must carry a clear warning label about the dangers of inhalant abuse and include the poison control hotline number. Vermont's governor signed HB 238 this quarter. This amends the PFAS and products law to expand definitions to include cleaning products, dental floss, and fluorine-treated plastic containers, and clarifies what is qualified as intentionally added PFAS. It also updates the juvenile products definition to now include pacifiers and exclude children's ATVs. The law now prohibits the sale, distribution, or offer for sale of any covered product in a fluorine-treated container. Starting January 1st, 2032, bans the manufacture or use of such containers for any consumer product. Washington State's law on lead in cookware, originally enacted as HB 1551, has been amended by SB 5628 to clarify and narrow its scope. Now the law applies only to cookware and utensils that are made of aluminum or brass, including items like pots, pans, griddles, knives, forks, unless they are fully enclosed in stainless steel. Components such as lids, rivets, and valves are also covered. The amendment raises the permissible lead limits. Starting January 1st, 2026, affected products cannot contain more than 90 parts per million of lead, and this limit tightens to 10 parts per million on January 1st, 2028. The law also moves up the date for reconsidering even lower lead limits to just after December 2030, 4 years earlier than previously planned. So Canada has been pretty quiet this quarter on the chemicals front. However, there were a few ministerial conditions issued under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act I wanted you to be aware of. They are listed here. These have various potential uses, but most are applicable to adhesives or cleaning products. So be sure to check these if you think you might use them. Just my reminder that I give each quarter, it seems, for these authorizations, that when ministerial conditions are imposed, notifiers may manufacture or import the covered substance, but they must meet the conditions laid out in the individual condition. The types of restrictions that may be imposed vary, but may include quantity, physical forms of the substance, and uses that are allowed. Additionally, rules for transfer of the substance and disposal are usually laid out in these as well. So that is all for me, and now I will pass it off to Cassie.
Great, thank you, Kim. As Kim mentioned, we do have lots to cover this quarter, so I'm going to hop right into Australia. On May 8th, Australia proposed new chemical restrictions for mercury and DBDPE, which is a flame retardant commonly used in electronics, plastics, textiles, and construction materials. Under the proposed amendment, starting in January 2027, DBDPE in Australia would be banned except for trace unavoidable amounts. Importing, exporting, and using the chemical would be restricted with limited exceptions allowed under specific conditions. Trace contamination or unintentional mixtures would be permitted only up to a concentration of 10 milligrams per kilogram. Importers and users would be required to know and disclose the amount present in their products, maintain records, and comply with ICHEM's minimum standards. Australia is also proposing new restrictions on mercury and mercury compounds to align with the Minamata Convention. As of January 1st, 2026, manufacturing, importing, and using a wide range of mercury substances would be banned. Certain essential uses would still be permitted, including specific types of switches, relays, measuring devices, and lighting, only where no mercury-free alternative exists. Some mercury-containing lighting products would be phased out gradually, with deadlines set for 2027 or 2030, depending on the product type. Articles already in use before 2026 could continue to be used until the existing stock is depleted. We do have some news out of South Africa this quarter. On April 4th, the South African Ministry for Health published a notice to formally designate certain hazardous substances under Group 1, Categories A and B. Category A includes all industrial substances listed in Annex 3 of the Rotterdam Convention, as well as mercury permitted under the Minamata Convention. It also covers other industrial substances that pose serious health risks during normal use or handling and are listed in the latest UN globally harmonized system. Category B includes pesticides or agricultural remedies that are considered substances of concern or restricted under South Africa's Fertilizers, Farm Feeds, Agricultural Remedies, and Stock Remedies Act of 1947. It also includes severely hazardous pesticides listed in Annex 2 of the Rotterdam Convention, provided they are approved and registered under the 1947 Act. This designation will take effect on October 4th of this year. And then we'll hop right over into Asia. On March 16th, the Chinese National Center for Food Safety Risk Assessment and the National Health Commission released an announcement approving 50 new national food safety standards and 9 amendments to existing ones. Among the approved, 6 specifically address food contact materials, focusing on the determination and migration limits of various chemicals, including phthalate esters, vinyl chloride, and N-nitrosamine compounds, among others. Additionally, an amendment to GB 9685 updates the standard for the use of additives in food contact materials. And then separately on May 13th, they issued a draft announcement seeking public comment on 2 new substances proposed for use in plastic food contact materials. The first is barium sulfate in polylactic acid materials, with a restriction that it must not be used in products intended for infants or young children. The second substance on the slide here that I won't try to attempt is limited to temperatures under 70 degrees Celsius for no more than 24 hours, and it's not suitable for fatty foods or those containing over 50% ethanol. The draft sets specific migration limits and requires that use restrictions be labeled according to GB 4801-06.1. Comments were due on June 12th. Both Macau and Hong Kong have taken steps to strengthen their environmental controls in line with global treaty obligations, specifically targeting mercury-added products and hydrofluorocarbons. On June 16th, Macau issued Order 109 under the Minamata Convention on Mercury, prohibiting a broad list of mercury-added products as of January 1st, 2026. These include items like fluorescent lamps, mercury-containing measuring devices, certain electronic components, cosmetics, and photographic film. Hong Kong is phasing in restrictions under their mercury control ordinance, with an amendment made on May 30th, adding 16 mercury-added products to the regulatory list. The first group, including compact fluorescent lamps, mercury vacuum pumps, and photographic film, will be restricted from December 31st, while the rest, which include mercury-containing batteries, switches, and halophosphate lamps, will follow once the relevant provisions are formally extended to Hong Kong. And then on April 11th, Hong Kong amended its ozone layer protection ordinance to implement the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. This update introduces a licensing system for the import and export of 18 HFCs and prohibits their manufacturing starting on December 1st. On May 23rd, the India Ministry of Health and Family Welfare published guidelines for the acceptance of recycled polyethylene terephthalate as food contact material. So these guidelines are focused solely on the recycling of post-consumer PET that was originally used in food contact applications, and they set the criteria for producing recycled PET that is safe to use again in food contact materials. Several recycling methods are recognized under this framework, including superclean, melt-in, paste-in, and chemical recycling. Whichever method is used, the process must include at least one decontamination step to ensure any potential contaminants are removed to a level safe for food contact use. Food packaging or containers made from recycled PET must be properly marked. So all parties involved in the production and use of recycled PET are required to maintain detailed documentation as well. Manufacturers must also apply for authorization of their recycling process and will be subject to an annual audit of their facility to ensure compliance. On April 22nd, South Korea's President, Prime Minister, and Ministry of Environment issued updates to the enforcement ordinance of the Recycling of Electrical and Electronic Equipment and Vehicles Act. The scope of regulated EEE has expanded significantly with this amendment. Any product designed for use at or below 1,500 volts DC or 1,000 volts AC must comply with hazardous substance limits. Some products are still exempt due to their unique recycling needs. Manufacturers and importers are now required to collect, transfer, and recycle essentially all products within that voltage threshold, including solar panels. Previously, batteries and mobile phones were exempt from hazardous substance limits. Now that exemption applies to any batteries built into EEE, covering substances like lead, mercury, hexavalent chromium, PBBs, PBDEs, and cadmium. New technological annexes have also been added. Annex 3 categorizes products by type for collection and recycling duties. And Annex 5 sets out unit costs for recycling by product category. Most of this amendment kicks in on January 1st, 2026. The expanded hazardous substance controls will take effect January 1st of 2028. And the battery exemption revision went into force upon publication. On May 28th, South Korea's Ministry of Environment proposed a draft amendment to the notice on regulation on the labeling of biocidal products. One major focus is on improving clarity and accessibility for general consumers. The proposal calls for product types to be clearly and prominently displayed on packaging, with safety-related details visually emphasized for easier recognition. Information will also be grouped together more logically to help users better understand the products at a glance. For manufacturers and importers, the amendment aims to simplify and clarify compliance. Overly detailed or redundant labeling elements and headings will be consolidated. The proposal also introduces labeling flexibility for small products, allowing certain information to appear in accompanying documentation. In cases where a product is duly regulated, manufacturers will not be required to repeat identical information. The use of electronic labels such as QR codes is being encouraged to provide additional information beyond what fits on the packaging. Products already labeled under the previous regulations can continue to use their existing packaging and accompanying documents until that inventory is depleted. And comments were due on this for June 17th. On April 25th, the Taiwan Bureau of Standards, Metrology, and Inspection released an updated version of CNS 15030, which are the general rules for classification and labeling of chemicals. This standard, which replaces the 2015 version with immediate effect, is mandatory under existing regulations. The revision introduces significant changes, including an update to Part 28 for substances hazardous to the ozone layer, and the addition of a new section, Part 29, covering desensitized explosives. These updates bring the system into closer alignment with the 8th revised edition of the UN Globally Harmonized System. This standard requires chemical labels to include pictograms, signal words, hazard and precautionary statements, the product name, and any hazardous ingredient and supplier information. On May 13th, the Taiwan Ministry of Environment issued an announcement amending the categories and management of handling for toxic chemical substances. The changes aim to strengthen restrictions on PFAS in line with the Stockholm Convention and to further limit the use of nonylphenol and nonylphenol polyethylene glycol ether. The amendment expands the list of regulated toxic chemical substances by adding 5 more PFOS and 352 PFOA. These are now restricted and may only be used for significant purposes. For the nonylphenols, the amendment lowers the control concentration threshold from 5% to 0.1%. It adds more isomers and CAS numbers to improve substance identification, and broadens the ban on their use to include the manufacture of industrial detergents, textile, leather, and metal processing, and pulp and paper manufacturing. These changes took effect immediately on May 13th. And finishing up in Asia, on June 14th, the Vietnam National Assembly approved their new law on chemicals. Slated to come into force on January 1st of 2026, the law strictly prohibits a range of actions, such as illegal handling of dangerous chemicals, unauthorized actions involving chemical-related documents, such as permits and certificates, withholding or falsifying information about chemicals or products containing them, using banned or unidentified chemicals in medicine, cosmetics, or household products, illegally producing or importing products that pose serious risk. Additional provisions include that dangerous goods transport law to be followed. Warehouses must show warnings and have emergency response systems. And then waste, including containers and equipment, must be treated safely and environmentally consciously. New chemicals to be registered before use or market entry with the required documentation. Packaging must meet legal requirements. Manufacturers and importers must disclose hazardous chemical content in products. And then, of course, the basics, chemical safety and security. Once enforced, Vietnam's previous chemical laws would be repealed. And then we'll come over finishing off in Europe. On June 5th, the Eurasian Economic Council Board issued a revised draft decision clarifying and expanding procedures under the EAEU's chemical regulation framework. The updated decision outlines the process for forming and maintaining the Union's Register of Chemicals and Mixtures as well as procedures for notifying new chemicals. As with the initial draft, the revised version details the types of data required for the chemical inventory, National Register segments, official public portals, and accepted sources of chemical information. Annex 7 introduces a list of substances with specific hazards, while Annex 8 defines general testing principles. The revised text introduces clearer procedures for notifying new chemicals. Applicants must submit notification, including a chemical safety report and documentation. Submissions may be on paper or in electronic format and must be translated into Russian and, where required, the official language of the member state. By January 1st, 2026, member states must submit chemical register management details. An inventory of chemicals currently circulating or intended for circulation must be completed by December 1st of 2026. And by December 1st of 2028, member states must have established the national parts of the Union Register. Some EU REACH updates. In the beginning of June, the European Commission introduced 2 regulatory actions under the REACH regulation. First, it published a draft regulation proposing to add 2,4-DNT to Annex 17, restricting its use in articles. The draft would prohibit the placing on the market or use of articles containing the substance in concentrations equal to or greater than 0.1% by weight. Exemptions may apply to toys, medical devices, and food contact materials. And a further 36-month derogation is proposed for some automotive uses. Articles placed on the market before the entry of force of the regulation would not be affected. On the same day, the Commission also published Regulation 1090, which formally amends Annex 17 to restrict DMAC and NEP. Under this rule, these substances may not be used in concentrations equal to or above 0.3% by weight unless manufacturers or importers update their chemical safety reports and safety data sheets. The restrictions will apply starting December 23rd, 2026 for all industrial uses of both DMAC and NEP, with a delayed application date of June 23rd of 2029 for the man-made fiber sector when using DMAC. This regulation entered into force on June 23rd. And then some EU POP updates. So the European Commission also published several key updates to Regulation 1021 on persistent organic pollutants this quarter, including amendments related to UV328, PFOS, and dechlorane plus. First, an amendment replacing Annex 1 was approved. It introduces a tiered restriction approach for UV328. The allowed concentration would be progressively reduced, so starting at 100 milligrams per kilogram from the date of entry into force, 10 milligrams per kilogram after 2 years, and 1 milligram per kilogram after 4 years. A 5-year transition period is granted for UV328 present in land-based motor vehicles and TAC film used in polarizers and photographic paper. Regulation 718 updates the unintentional trace contaminant limits for PFOS. The regulation introduces a new UTC level of 0.025 milligrams per kilogram for PFOS and reduces the UTC limit to 1 milligram per kilogram for PFOS-related substances across mixtures and articles. These changes align PFOS restrictions with existing rules for PFOA based on similar use patterns. Dechlorane Plus has also been formally added to Annex 1 as a persistent organic pollutant. Initially, a UTC limit of 1,000 milligrams per kilogram is allowed in substances, mixtures, and articles for 30 months after entry into force. And then after this period, the limit tightens right down to 1 milligram per kilogram. The regulation also introduces 5-year exemptions for certain uses, including automotive and industrial spare parts and diagnostic instruments. Existing articles already in use under a valid exemption may continue to be used even after the exemption expires. The European Chemicals Agency has proposed a restriction on the use of certain hexavalent chromium substances. This proposal would ban its use across most applications, with limited exceptions for certain use categories, such as electroplating and surface treatments, provided that stringent exposure and emission thresholds are met. Barium chromate has also been included within the scope to prevent substitution with similarly hazardous alternatives. The proposal restriction is intended to replace the existing authorization system under REACH, offering a more streamlined and proactive regulatory approach. A 6-month consultation began on June 18th. Following this, ECHA's committees will review all submissions and finalize their opinions. Ultimately, the European Commission, together with all 27 member states, will determine the final scope and conditions of this restriction. On May 21st, the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine adopted resolution number 588, which approves the procedure for state registration of hazardous factors. This resolution introduces mandatory registration for both chemical and biological hazards, whether as standalone substances or as components of chemical products. According to the new rules, registration is required if a chemical substance is intentionally released during use and is present in the product at a concentration of 10% or more. Responsibility for submitting the registration lies with the manufacturer or importer. Applications must include several key elements, such as safety data sheets, classification and labeling details, and for biological substances, a strain passport. Applications can be filed either on paper or electronically through the register's online system. And this came into force on May 28th. This was kind of a wild story, and I don't think it was meant as an April Fool's joke. But in the UK, a ban on dechlorane plus and UV328 took effect on April 1st, classifying these substances as restricted persistent organic pollutants. This regulatory position shifted the very next month when, on May 20th, POP Amendment number 3 regulations were enacted, removing the entries for both substances. The repeal was driven by significant and immediate supply chain concerns, especially in critical sectors. The UV government implemented this legislative reversal as a temporary relief mechanism to ensure the continued availability of essential materials and components that rely on these substances. Importantly, the government emphasized that this move does not represent a permanent policy shift. The UK plans to reevaluate the essential uses of these substances and to reintroduce appropriate restrictions after considering potential exemptions. Finally, on April 10th, the UK's Environmental Audit Committee launched an inquiry about addressing the risks from PFAS. The goal is to assess whether the current UK regulatory framework is adequate for managing the risks posed by PFAS found in products like nonstick cookware, textiles, and food packaging. The EAC aims to benchmark UK regulation against that of the US and EU, examine the capacity of UK research bodies, and understand PFAS distribution across products, regions, and social groups. The findings are expected to significantly influence UK environmental policy, potentially leading to tighter PFAS controls and prompting industries that rely on PFAS to begin exploring safer alternatives. The comments were due on this May 26th. Meanwhile, on June 4th, the UK Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs published a policy paper detailing its interim approach to incorporating the PMT, which is persistent mobile toxic concept, in UK REACH management, particularly concerning PFAS. UK REACH currently addresses PMT type substances only to a limited extent. So to strengthen the regulatory capability, DEFRA identified 3 key research needs. One is a method to define inherent mobility that factors in environmental conditions. 2 is a screening tool to prioritize substances based on hazard and exposure. And the 3rd is a monitoring program for persistent and mobile substances. And that does it for this quarter. I'm going to pass it back over to Orla to see if we have time to cover any questions.
Thank you both so much. That was fantastic. Yeah, I am conscious of the time, so I think we do have time for one question. Does the North Carolina bill only cover food packaging?
Okay, yes, that's for me. No, it's actually for all packaging for products, including bags. They specifically state there were exclusions in it for products that are regulated by FIFRA or FDA, and I included those on the slide. But yes, it is not just food packaging.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kim. As mentioned, if you have any other questions that you would like to submit using the Ask a Question widget, please do so now, and we will follow up with you directly. Our SMEs will do their research and get back to you. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in with us today. We hope you found today's presentation helpful, and we look forward to seeing you in our upcoming webinars. You can check out our resources section on the website to stay updated and to access our latest white papers, blogs, webinars, both upcoming and on demand. And I would like to thank Kim and Cassie as well for the fantastic presentation they gave today, covering a huge array of regulations across the globe. But as mentioned, we do have plenty of upcoming content, so make sure you keep an eye out. Our next webinar, US Product Compliance in 2025, Key Federal and State Changes to Watch, is scheduled for July 30th, so we hope to see you there. Thank you.